has grown unpopular, increasingly unpopular, I would say, in Russia, because he's seen as someone who was primarily responsible for Russia's initial failures and miscalculations at the beginning of the war in Ukraine. We have also seen that last year, Prigozhin has been attacking him quite a lot, and one of his requests, demands was to basically for Putin to get rid of Shoigu, because he was pointing at Shoigu and making a point that basically he was the one who was responsible for all the battlefield failures. I wouldn't say that the reshuffle is completely surprising, because there have been a number of rumors about potential resignation of Shoigu coming soon. And also we have seen that months earlier, the Deputy Defense Minister Timur Ivanov was arrested on bribery charges, which is itself quite comical when you take into consideration the Russian system and how corrupt it is.
Thousands of civilians have been evacuated from the Kharkiv region of Ukraine this weekend after Moscow's forces launched a renewed ground offensive. Russia's targeted towns and villages in the northeast with a barrage of artillery and mortar fire. This comes as the Russian President Vladimir Putin has removed his long-term ally Sergei Shoigu as defense minister in a rare reshuffle of his team. Earlier on, I spoke with Natia Seskuria, an associate fellow at the Royal United Services Institute. And Natia told me why Moscow is attacking Kharkiv with such intensity.
Kharkiv is Ukraine's second largest city that Russia already attempted to take in early 2022. They have failed to accomplish this goal, but it is a very serious target. And I think now Putin feels like there is certain momentum on his side, while Ukraine is still looking not as strong as maybe before. And Ukraine is now waiting for the Western weapon supply to be delivered. And also they have struggled for quite some time with manpower shortages. So I think what Russia is doing now is to use this time and also to ensure that Ukrainian forces are redirected from the Eastern Front. They open up a new front, and the attention goes towards the Kharkiv region at this point.
Natia, you mentioned, of course, that Ukraine is waiting for more weapons from the West. Is that the biggest reason why it feels like there's been a change, a shift in the dynamic of this war, whereas we now have those Russian troops on the offensive to a greater extent than they have been in recent months?
Yes, absolutely. I do think that this is one of the key reasons. Unfortunately, the Western aid has been on hold for quite some time. And there has been much uncertainty when it comes to whether or not the US would make this decision. The decision obviously has been positive. However, it has not really helped Ukraine throughout these couple of months to gain some momentum. And also this has seriously affected the morale of Ukrainians that felt very much let down when it comes to continuous and strong Western support, while Russia has reiterated many times that they do not plan to stop the war or to decrease the pressure on Ukraine. Quite the contrary. And we see that as summer arrives, and as it was already expected, Russia is going on another offensive. And in the meantime, of course, Russians have been intimidating Ukrainians through using various means, and we have seen various attempts to attack the critical infrastructure in Ukraine. I do think that one of the primary reasons why we haven't seen Ukraine succeeding and any major successes on Ukraine's side is the critical vulnerabilities in terms of the weapon supplies that they have had.
And that's exactly the main line of attack that the Russians are using. I mean, the number of troops the Russians have committed to the fight so far around Kharkiv is around about 2,000. But this aerial bombardment and this artillery barrage unleashed from across the border, it is ferocious, isn't it?
Absolutely, and they are trying to put pressure on civilians as well. And we have seen that there have been some evacuations already ongoing because of the heavy pressure that Russians are placing on this region. But what they try to do is to completely demoralize Ukrainians and to basically reinforce this message that Ukraine is very much on its own, and the West would supply them as long as would give them some supplies when it comes to military supplies, but they won't have enough help to win this war. So that's why we have been seeing and hearing some messages coming from Putin that they are still willing to discuss some sort of settlement, which is not really the settlement that he's offering. What he's offering is that basically Ukraine signs up to losing its territorial integrity and sovereignty.
It's stark when you look at a map now of Ukraine and you see all the eastern regions and the fighting that's been going on in the Donbass, and now the area around Kharkiv, a completely separate part of north eastern Ukraine, and this bombardment coming from over on the Russian border, and this idea that the Russians are trying to make civilian life in Kharkiv untenable, and reducing this cultural and economic hub to rubble. It's a terrifying situation for the people who live in that city, but also currently the villages surrounding it, because there are smaller villages, aren't there? Maybe population 2,000-3,000 who are now being evacuated and moved to safer parts of the country.
Absolutely, and Putin actually has mentioned a couple of times that he promised Russians that he would try to do is to create some sort of buffer zone to avoid and to stop frequent Ukrainian attacks on Belgorod and other Russian border regions. And as you mentioned, Kharkiv is at the border, so the population is absolutely frightened and worried that this might be an attempt from Russia to cut supply routes and besiege the city, where it is quite a large city. As we mentioned, 1.1 million people currently reside in Kharkiv. So this is a very serious escalation, something that Russians would not be able to achieve quickly in terms of their goals and aspirations in this case. But already we see that Ukrainians, for example, today have mentioned that Russia is already achieving some tactical successes.
Yeah. Natia, when you look at defense systems and you saw how the Israelis repelled the Iranian attack recently, Ukraine's lack of air defense systems and ammunition has been made starkly clear, hasn't it? But by the statistics it issues on the number of Russian missiles fired and intercepted. What does it need? Is this a case of we've talked so much about the planes, the F-16s, which still seem to be months away from arriving in Ukraine, and the training that comes with using those planes. What does it need to slow down these attacks on Kharkiv?
Well, it is complexity of a few factors, and one of the main priorities for Ukraine was the U.S. to finally achieve the decision, because this aid that is coming from the U.S. is critical and existential, I would say, for Ukraine to survive the upcoming attacks. And now we are not talking even about Ukrainian advances. We are talking about Ukraine being able to hold the lines. And on Friday, the U.S. has announced that there will be $400 million worth military aid package for Ukraine, which is very significant. And there have been some urgent necessities from Ukraine, such as air defense munitions, artillery rounds, anti-tank weapons, armored vehicles. So it's the hope certainly is that US will be able to deliver these requirements, these necessities to Ukraine as soon as possible, because Now even the weather conditions are giving advantage to Russians that have been preparing for this offensive for quite some time.
Well, let's just briefly touch on the Russian side of things, because there has been a pretty major announcement in the last 24 hours, and President Putin has replaced his defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, in what's been described essentially as a major reshuffle. The deputy prime minister, Andrei Belousov, has actually come in, but Shoigu has been, he's been incredibly popular for Putin, hasn't he? He's been loyal. He's worked with him from the 90s, the 2000s. Why has this reshuffle happened, and what can we expect to be the knock-on effects from Andrei Belousov taking over?
Well, Shoigu is a very significant figure in Russian politics in Putin's circle. He, as you described, he is a Putin loyalist. He was appointed as a defense minister in 2012, and he has served by Putin's side for many years, since very early days, basically. He has grown unpopular, increasingly unpopular, I would say, in Russia, because he's seen as someone who was primarily responsible for Russia's initial failures and miscalculations at the beginning of the war in Ukraine. We have also seen that last year, Prigozhin has been attacking him quite a lot, and one of his requests, demands, was to basically for Putin to get rid of Shoigu, because he was pointing at Shoigu and making a point that basically he was the one who was responsible for all the battlefield failures. I wouldn't say that the reshuffle is completely surprising, because there have been a number of rumors about potential resignation of Shoigu coming soon. And also we have seen that months earlier, the Deputy Defense Minister Timur Ivanov was arrested on bribery charges, which is itself quite comical when you take into consideration the Russian system and how corrupt it is. I think one of the most interesting things that happened recently in Russia is that Nikolai Patrushev has also been removed from his current position.
And who's that? And what's his role?
He used to be the Secretary of the Security Council. Now Shoigu will replace him as the Secretary of Security Council. And Patrushev has been a very significant, very powerful figure, also someone who is very closely aligned with Putin.
Okay.
I mean, we cannot really say that this is a complete demotion for Shoigu, but we know that in many cases, when Putin wants someone to be out, but not necessarily in a very harsh way, he sends them to this sort of bodies such as the National Security Council, when he will still have a powerful role, but in effect, when it comes to practice, he will be losing the executive powers, obviously.
Natia Seskuria there, Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute, founder of the Regional Institute for Social Security Studies, and Associate Professor in Russian Politics, advising at Chatham House there. On the situation both in Russia with that change of personnel by Putin, removing his long-term ally Sergei Shoigu as defense minister, and that really is a rare reshuffle of his top team there in Russia. But also what's going on in the ground, which, you could argue is not being talked about enough. Thousands of civilians now being evacuated from the Kharkiv region. And don't forget, this is a different region to the Donbass. It's a different line of attack, and it's an aerial bombardment from Moscow after Russian forces launched a renewed offensive in that part of Ukraine, targeting those towns, targeting those villages in the northeast with a barrage of artillery and mortar fire. And Kharkiv is an amazing place. It's the cultural center, if you like, of Ukraine, and the Ukrainians desperately asking for more anti-missile and defense systems, as well as those F-16 aircraft, which they say they desperately need to repel those Russian attacks.